Hi folks, I'm Arkush here with your Week 2 Chicago Sun-Times Fantasy Forecast. And it's been a long time since I could say play some Chicago Bears offensive players on your fantasy football team, but this is a really good weekend for it. If you look at what the Vikings defense did last week, giving up over 450 yards to the Detroit Lions, and you've got the obvious, which is of course Matt Forte, Brandon Marshall, but don't be afraid to play Alshon Jeffrey, and Jay Cutler is not a starting quarterback in most fantasy leagues. He should be this week against the Minnesota Vikings. Another play you ought to really consider, Steven Jackson of the Atlanta Falcons. You probably drafted him as a number one running back, but we're terribly disappointed at what happened in New Orleans last week. Well, this week he gets his former team, the St. Louis Rams, in Atlanta for the opener. It will be a different story, so don't be shy about staying with Steven Jackson. And how about this one? The Arizona Cardinals, a quarterback down there, Carson Palmer, and running back Rashard Mendenhall. This gets back to that Bears-Vikings story. The Vikings were in Detroit. The Lions weren't very good on defense either, so don't be afraid to put Palmer out there. He and Larry Fitzgerald will hook up, and we expect Rashard Mendenhall to get off this week, so he could be a great flex player or number 2 running back. The Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers won't get a lot of action in fantasy this year. I'm talking about Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders, but the Cincinnati Bengal cornerbacks had big problems in the second half against the Chicago Bears receivers. They gave up big plays down the field. That's what Ben Roethlisberger is going to try and do in this one, so you might want to go there. And how about a little bit of an unknown? Have you figured out yet who Julius Thomas is? He's the starting tight end for the Denver Broncos. Now, a week ago Thursday, you saw him with 2 touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens. He gets the New York Giants this week, and last week Giants defense played well, but they did give Cowboys tight end Jason Witten 2 touchdowns, so that's something you might want to look at there. Now, we've also got some matchups that you're going to want to avoid this weekend, and we will start in New Orleans, where I would stay away from wide receiver Marques Colston. I know he's a first-string wide receiver in fantasy, but they've got the Tampa Bay Bucks this week, and believe it or not, over the last 5 years, in 10 games against the Bucks, Colston's only got 2 touchdowns. For the Indianapolis Colts, running game was non-existent last week. Stay away from Vick, Ballard, Ahmad Bradshaw. They've got a Miami defense that held the Cleveland Browns under 50 yards rushing. And then finally, I wouldn't play Robert Griffin III. You probably drafted him as your starting quarterback. You saw him start very slow last Monday night. The Green Bay Packers have got to have a win here. I think RG3 is still trying to figure out how to protect himself, as well as being rusty from missing the preseason. So I would stay away from Robert Griffin III this weekend. That does it for our Week 2 Chicago Sun-Times Fantasy Football Forecast. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.